Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is having a good day. Thank you very much for joining us. This is a very special webinar on an important step for the Brazilian mining industry. This is a process that actually started, I would say, 10 years ago with various players in the industry, making the effort of making sure that Brazil finally would get aligned with the international reporting standards. And I think we had to do something and put a webinar together just to spread the word and let our international friends know about this important development. So while I was thinking about what I would say in this brief introduction, I thought that what we would be talking about at the end of the day, it's all about trust. And when I say trust, I think of transparency, I think of clarity, I think of understanding of the information, which are the essential aspects and fundamentals for a decision-making process for an investment. And what is happening now is that Brazil is finally aligning its principles in a resolution after a very much appreciated resolution number 94 of the National Mining Agency, which finally incorporates the concepts and principles of the international reporting system and aligns Brazil with the better known mining countries such as Canada, Australia, South Africa, and the US. And I think this is to praise a lot of the individuals, and some of those are here with us today, that have made an effort, have contributed with the debates throughout these 10 years, pushing for the regulations to improve. As people might know, the mining code and the mining code regulations had different principles, which created a lot of confusion, making references to indicated, inferred, and measured reserves, which was, which has, quite a different interpretation to the CRISCO international principles and guidelines. So this process started with the changes to the regulations of the mining code, in which finally we had the principles of having resources inferred, indicated, and measured, and probable and proven reserves. And with this new resolution, we're finally incorporating in the regulations of the ANM these various principles with the definitions that align with the international standards. And again, these, at the end of the day, I think with the development of these principles and companies starting to report resources and reserves in the international way more and more, I think this raises trust, because investors will understand that Brazil is now speaking the same language, the geological language, the mining language, the reserves and resources. When they would be comparing the results, they would know that they're comparing this using the same language. So, and I think that creates trust, that creates transparency and clarity. So to discuss a little bit more in detail these new reporting systems, we have three very special guests, very experienced men in the Brazilian mining industry, dealing with various international projects who I couldn't think of anyone better to speak about these issues today. So without further ado, I'll let each one to please just say a few words about yourself, introduce yourself and your company so that we can get it started. So Fernando, perhaps we could start with you.
Yes, well, thank you first of all for the invitation. And hello everybody, I'm Fernando Talarico. I'm a geologist working in the exploration sector for more than 30 years. I've worked a lot in South America, in general, in Africa. Started my career in Vale, then I went to Falconbridge, Noranda for many years. A quick passage to BHP, and then I went into the junior company space. And in the past 10 years, I've been with Aguia. I started, working in the company from the very, very beginning of it when we were still acquiring the tenements, and now we're on the verge of opening our first mine. I became the CEO of this company of Aguia Resources 3 years ago. It's an Australian listed company. And because of that, we're subject to all the regulation related to the JORC code. I am registered as a qualified person with the Ontario Association, the Australian Association of Professional Geoscientists of Ontario. But these systems are all internationally connected, so I can make all the announcements in the Sydney, the Australian Exchange. So, and I have been working with this. I have been a QP since back to 2005. Probably one of the first in Brazil. I'm very happy to see that this. Finally, we are, as you said, we're talking the same language. The numbers are the same. The standards of creating and the credibility of the numbers we're going to generate in terms of resources, reserves, etc. here in Brazil are legitimately done in the same pattern that's in standards that elsewhere. I'll pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fernando. Perhaps Richard, would you like to say a few words, please?
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here today with everybody and have the opportunity to kind of speak through different through different lens. I'm an outsider looking in. I'm an engineer by trade, 25 plus years in the industry. Moved to Brazil full time in 2008. Very blessed to have a long career here in Brazil. I'm based out of Sao Paulo. Blessed to know many of the individuals on this call as well, and have a long association with Pedro and Verano. It's a great opportunity to be here today. Just want to thank you for that. South Star is a publicly listed company on the Toronto Stock Exchange. We are just getting ready to start construction here shortly on what will be the first new graphite project in the Americas in over a decade. So when Pedro asked me to participate, I was excited about the opportunity because I've been, again, an outsider looking in, seeing the various changes that have happened in Brazil since 2008 from my perspective. And again, I think, many times we take one step forward and two steps back, but obviously I think in many ways, Brazil, with this resolution amongst many others is making a step towards transparency, towards open communication on everything that's going on. So again, just a fantastic opportunity to be here. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity and just happy to participate.
Excellent, Richard. Thank you very much. So passing the word to Marcos. And Marcos, I left you to the end on purpose because I would ask you if you could not only talk about yourself, the Codelco and your experience in Brazil, but also if you could continue and give us a little on your participation on the CBRR. For the ones who are not familiar, the CBRR is what under CRISCO concepts would be the Brazilian NRO. and that's the organization that I actually would issue the guidelines, the reporting templates, and so forth, which is a very serious and well consolidated organization nowadays. And Marcos has been very involved with CBRR throughout the years. So passing the word to you, Marcos.
Well, thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Verano, for having me here. It's a great pleasure to, as Pedro just mentioned, spread the word. I'm on the mining sector for the last 27 years. I've been working for major and junior companies. My last 13 and a half years, I've been with Codelco, Chilean copper producer. Having said that, I would say, first of all, we're here to evaluate what's new on the Resolution 94. But that's a good story, because this issue about international standards, reporting practices, reporting of exploration results, resource and reserves, as long as I know, and I've been at least from a very minor participation on the historical initiatives from all the way until 2014. We were all aware of the issue about having to, one report for the stocks exchange prepared under certain regulations, and the reports we used to file in Brazil file as to the Brazilian rule, basically the UN rule dating back from 1967. This discussion in Brazil is as old as year 2000 about that. It all started with the EPROMINES, the Professional Miners Associations, and then it moved on. We had discussions eventually in symposiums and in specific events and venues. And after that, we had another discussion, a second round, as long as I recall, on about 2009, 2010. I was already with the DIM as well. And then we had, after we digested what went wrong on the prior attempts, we had a strong movement from the ABPM that catalyzed all the other two entities, DIM and IBRA. And together, we started discussions with CRISPO, on the person of Harry Parker at the time, in support from various colleagues. And this time, I think what made a difference is we don't need a governmental entity to take part in these discussions, because this is very similar to self-regulation. This is it's about standards, about transparency, about it's a peer-based approach. And from 2014, we had about a year, a little bit more of real long discussions, monthly meetings of all the interested parties, all the three entities. And 2015, we launched the CBRR, and since then, a very tough start. We had discussions on many various Brazilian states, from São Paulo to Pará. We had more specific meetings at the NPM at that time, at the ANM. ANM, obviously 2018, 2019 onwards. And the good thing is we managed to put in place the CBRR to have the entity going, and did our best to help the ANM prepare and do all the necessary regulatory studies and impact studies, so that we come up with the Resolution 94. This is a short story about how this initiative took place. And CBRR, as we speak, I'm not speaking directly for CBRR, but I'm glad to be one of the founding members. And we had more than 100 PQR, as we call Profissional Qualificado Registrado. It's the QPs. Brazil has about 300, it's not an updated number, but something around 250 QPs from Australia or South Africa or Canada. So there was a momentum for that. I think this is good. And in general, I see that resolution 94, it's welcomed. Obviously, we had some other issues from a private sector perspective, but it's very welcome. And I hope I could give you a short summary of how this thing was cooked since 20 years.
No, excellent, Marcos. Thank you very much, and thank you for all of your efforts. I know that you worked a lot to get CBRR accepted into CRISCO and having the recognition of CBRR as the Brazilian NRO, the National Reporting Organization, and I know that he also worked on the Brazilian template, right, for the reporting system. So I'll pick this issue on the template to perhaps Fernando, you could explore a little. Again, when we talk about these reporting principles, we are always thinking about trust, transparency, credibility, as you said. And when we think of the other reporting systems such as JORC or the National Instrument 4131 in Canada, we know that historically that all started with scandals, right? So we had the Poseidon scandal, and we had the Bre-X, the very famous Bre-X, which also became a movie, which is very good, by the way. But these scandals, they brought the requirement of having, again, the same language, the same principles, so that investors could read the results, the figures, and be sure that they would be receiving information that would be accurate and so decide to invest or not. And I understand, and that's from a lawyer perspective, that perhaps for you that are technical guys, you understand it better. But as far as I understand, the national reporting organizations, so the country organizations that are associated with CRISCO, they have a certain degree of flexibility to adjust their templates and their guides to local regulations and specific issues, right? So I think for and I can say it, by working in this industry also for 25 years, I noticed that clients and investors, they always make the question on how different it could be, right? So what level of detail could be different in terms of the templates, and thinking of the CBRR guide. I don't know if you have ever, compared it to JORC and NI 4131, and what can you tell us about?
Yeah, what I would say, generally speaking, and I think this is the great change, is first of all, we're going to have a better measurement, and a measurement that talks with all the rest of the world, of our own national inventory of minerals, right? Before we were using a totally different strategy. But and then that changes the concept of how to report things. For you spoke about the movie, and this was all motivated by fraud in the past. So the Bre-X scandal, they were selling stock of what they said would be the biggest gold deposit, gold resource in the world, and after all, they found it wasn't the biggest, and actually it wasn't a deposit of all at all. So they were spiking the samples. So when we bring in these practices in, Pedro, we're not looking at only at the final numbers of the resource or if they're precise or not compared to ABC standards, and we're obviously now we're talking the same language, but there's much more that goes underneath that. To get to this stage, we have to talk about sample custody, the QA/QC protocols. How do you for example, let's go back to the movie again. So we would have to be inserting independent standards in those batches of samples that were spiked, and there's a lot of mechanisms that we're now going to be officially using, and again we for those that are working in the EXX or in the TXX, we have done this for decades already, but that give the investors, the market in general, the confidence that they're not going to be fooled around and tricked and get into schemes like we unfortunately saw in Indonesia and that whole Reacts thing. So credibility is the word. Yeah. Turn back to you, Pedro.
No, perfect, yeah. Perfect. I think and on the same line of discussion here, Richard, I was thinking in terms also in credibility, of course, international investors, they will be looking at these reports prepared in Brazil, and they will want to know who actually, prepared the reports, who signed the reports. And I understand, and Marcos just mentioned that we have now about 100 QPUs with the CBRR, which is, it's an incredible adherence from Brazilian technicians. So I know that there is an issue internationally for all NROs that refer to the concept of relevant experience, right? For a certain person to be considered a qualified professional. And how does the relevant experience concept vary from a Brazilian perspective to the Canada, Australia, and others? Is Brazil more strict? Is more soft? What can you tell us about
it? Again, I think every country has its own particular nuances, right? If you look at Canada, you look at the US, you look at South Africa, Australia, et cetera. In general, I think most of those countries, they start with the experience coming from school, whatever their study program is. The QP is nothing other than somebody that says that I have the relevant experience to write about or report about and put my name beside it as a professional geologist or engineer or whatever it is that they're actually signing as a QP. And then typically most of these reports are very multidisciplinary, right? I mean, you have civil, you have metallurgy, you have mining engineering, you have geology, you have a broad range of professionals that have to be involved to actually be able to kind of talk about a project. Like, it could be gold, it could be zinc, it could be whatever. But again, nobody does anything by themselves. So when you look out across what's required to actually produce a JORC or 43101, it involves a lot of disciplines. Overseas, for the most part, when I say overseas, outside of Brazil, folks have to work for, they have to have a particular degree of study. They have to work for a particular period of time. I'll speak for myself, being an American, before you could even sit for your professional engineering degree test, your license, you had to work for 4 or 5 years underneath a PE. So there's a period of training and things like that. Canada is similar to that. Most of our Canadian brethren walk around with their little nickel pinky rings as professional engineers and whatnot. And so I think when you look at the Brazil experience and kind of how you go about developing to be a QP it starts at school. Then it goes into your training. I think in general, this will help us. This resolution will help get universities more involved in that process as kind of the starting point. Obviously, there needs to be professional experience that goes along with it. And then, most of my friends that are QPs here in Brazil basically start off either, working through Australia or South Africa or Canada, some extent to the US, and then they get a certain level of experience and then can get qualified as a QP here in Brazil. So I think in Brazil, it's in process and developing. And I think slowly it's changing so that QPs here in Brazil are becoming, just as recognized and just as relevant and just as capable as QPs anywhere in the world. Brazil is an unbelievable country in terms of geologic potential, in terms of deposits. In many ways, Brazil is like the moon, right? And when you look at dollars spent per hectare on exploration, Brazil is untouched in many ways. So I think there's lots of really positive, exciting opportunities here. And now that we're using, basically this Declaration 94 to kind of standardize the language and the requirements that go into these reports, as we move forward from this resolution into the future, countries and jurisdictions will all be speaking the same language when it comes to at least, resource and reserves and the reports, the multidisciplinary professionals that have to put these reports together. It's a work in progress for sure, but I think it's, again, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and you just keep moving forward. And over time, I think the professionals here, the professionals in Peru, Chile, et cetera, I think are, top professionals around the world as well. So I think it's just something that this resolution is really just another step in the progress, but it's something that I think will spur additional investment and additional education and additional training, so that professionals here will be at the same level as any other professionals anywhere in the world. And we're fortunate to have folks like Fernando and Marcos and others that have been in Brazil for a long time and are helping kind of bring this forward into international standards, and it's nothing but positive. So I think over time and investment and things like that, it'll certainly come up to be equivalent or as other jurisdictions, but it's a process. So I think when you look back at older reports, it's going to be difficult to imagine those changing over time. But you draw a line in the sand and you start moving forward. So I think it's just something that there's lots of very qualified professionals. There's lots of very qualified companies. For companies like ours, which are always trying to go out, and we can contract professionals from anywhere in the world, be it Australia, Canada, US, Europe, or Brazil. We contract, speaking for Southstar, we contract as much as possible local firms, because we want to deal with companies that understand Brazil, can produce documents and stamp documents in Brazil. The ART, which is basically your technical PE stamp that has to be applied to all the reports here. So, for us, I think this is just another positive step where local firms will just be that much more capable of being able to provide high quality services for companies like ours.
Oh, that's great, Richard. Thank you. And if I'm not wrong, and perhaps Marcos can expand a little, but if I'm not wrong, the CBRRs taking the requirements of, I think it's 5 years of graduation, at least with 10 years of experience, right? And which is, I think it's a conservative approach. And just taking it from there, Marcos, in terms of the final wording, I know that you had some thoughts on the optional side of the resolution, because for the ones who are listening and didn't have the opportunity to read the resolution yet, we have the mandatory side which would essentially impose on mining companies that currently hold mineral rights, meaning exploration permits and mining concessions, to adapt all of their reports and make sure that, you know, they use the correct principles and concepts of the resolution. So they cannot be using the same wording they had used in the past with the previous mining code and so forth. And that's mandatory, but that there's also an optional public declaration, so to speak, in which would be a more detailed and sort of reporting, which is will be public from the start. So any company which is actually filing the public declaration would know that this will go public, and will follow the various other requirements which are more aligned to the CRISCO template. But in terms of that final wording, Marcos, and these principles, do you think it was a reasonable approach in terms of the regulatory change, or do you think we still should push for a further mandatory imposition by the ANM?
Okay, Pedro, just as a quick comment regarding the years of experience that the CBRR requires from its QPRs, we're talking about 10 years, minimum years of experience. As long as I recall, only Chile, the Chileans do require 10 years as well. But as Richard has said, it's got to do with the nuances of each country or with jurisdiction. We do have specific, on its essence, all the NROs apply the same template, the same principles, and this is not changed. But we do have specific issues, each one of the jurisdictions that had to be adapted. But this is not material to the greater good, that is having the principles in place, having the international standards in place. Today we know we got 14 countries that adopted it and are members of the CRISCO. In other words, we have 14 NROs. The European one includes basically Eastern European countries. But as to your questions, I can say partially pleased with the resolution. I think it took too long for us to reach this point. It took us about 4 years to get where we are now, but we understand that it's got lots of priorities. It's been a titanic work to put in place and have all the necessary regulatory changes. You know, they have to publish many resolutions. But there was a we've experienced a major change, I would say. We have the public auctions. There's an effort in place to get rid of the regulatory stock, you know, areas that are for whatever reasons on standby, and that could be back on the system so that we have more discoveries. I agree with Richard. We have only 50% of our territory mapped on a 100,000 scale. It's like the moon. That's a good comparison, because I have someone question me, do you expect something from Carajás? Yes, I do expect, because there are other new things to come from Carajás, which is in Brazilian terms, let's say a major exploration terrain. But there's one fundamental advance I can name in regard to the resolution. It's the incorporation of the CRISCO standards to our legislation. And despite being optional so far, I consider the fundamental step forward has been taken. In other words, we do have the CRISCO principles in Brazil, the CBRR template, put into the regulatory framework. So whatever your choice, optional, public declaration, that will be public information. Things won't change for those who are already on the stock exchange, for public companies. You have one work less, one activity less. You don't have to have a report on the old United Nations 1967 standard, and another one to your stock exchange for the, stakeholders. It will be the same. This is good. As long as you choose, no, I want just to, I'm still doing my exploration work. I don't have final conclusion so far. And it's my, for whatever reasons, it's my, I've got my secrets, right? My issues of my interests on throughout my exploration program. I won't do the public declaration. I will keep to the, let's say, the regulatory demands, and I'll file my reports, my exploration results, but as per the current rule. Okay, could be something a bit more aligned. It could be, but there's a lot going on so far, and this resolution is essential to another initiative. I don't know if our audience is aware of, which has to do with the Invest Mine, which is an initiative by the Secretary of Geology, Mining and Mineral Transformation. And each one, the resolution and this initiative talked a lot, because Brazil give one step ahead, one big step. We're now talking the same language in terms of declaration, reserving resources and exploration reserves with all the first league of mining countries. And we are now trying to get rid of red tapes. But this is, I used to say that mining in Brazil, it's got a lot of downside, but it's not from within mining, it's from externalities that, we have to present guarantees before our projects are operating. We have long ways in terms of, and I'm not complaining, please don't understand it that way, but these all talk to, all these themes are linked in some way, somehow. Then, but I would say it's very appropriate, it's very positive that we have the legislation. It's all set on the regulation, so this is positive. I think otherwise sometimes on my first reading of the resolution, but after reading that a lot of times and bearing in mind what I know about the history, it's a good move.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think at the end of the day, we all were very pleased with this development, and I think Fernando, if the ANM should also be pleased in terms of what they will be receiving in terms of the quality of the information they will be receiving as to what is in the underground, right? Because I think that's something that is being on the table for quite a while, the lack of information, the geological information that unfortunately we still have. And as Richard said, it's like the moon, right? And it shouldn't be, because we're such a mining country. So the more information that we have and we can share with potential exploration companies and investors, the better. And I think one side of the resolution is to create these system of reporting and of resources and reserves, which will be, at least in theory, will be used by the ANM to make decisions, to boost the regulatory side, even influence perhaps the decisions on the public tenders, the online public tenders. So the more information you have from a geological perspective, the better, right? So is that also your perception on what will happen?
Oh, yes. Thanks, Pedro. Yes, 100%. And also, I would put in this basket, the fact that in the past 10 years, I just lost track of time on this, but everything now is digital, right? For example, I remember going to other countries outside Brazil and South America, having to start offices and this and that. and then you started accessing the geological database, and everything's on print, nothing's on the internet. So this is good. We can go back and retrieve relatively easily data, the geological survey as well. So all this builds a good scenario for investment, but everything is based on data, right? You stake or a tenement based on information, right? It has to be in a district, it has activity that you're looking for showing, you want to know what the neighbors are doing, et cetera, et cetera. So this builds the concept of investing or not. So the more data we have, the better, right? But yeah, and also I see that for the companies in general, it is, it just makes life easier. I'm speaking for Aegea, for example. We would have, many times we were faced with this. We report things that in the JORC standard, especially for obviously for the AX6. But when it came to reporting the documentation specifically to our agency, it's not quite the same. So you have to redo and now the exact document can go obviously in different languages, but you don't have to redo work that was done already, and the standards is the same. And there's another aspect, Pedro, that I crossed my mind when I was thinking about this talk we would have today, is the fact that the Brazilian exchange is very unfamiliar with pre-production projects. We had a couple of initiatives that were actually very good. A couple of companies, pre-production, say 10, 12 years ago, had a very good run on the Bovespa, right? But in my opinion, because we didn't have these practices and regulations of standards and the concept of the QP, and the fact that the resolution 94 now, it's very specific that the QPs are subject to civil law, etc. They're responsible for the information they sign off. Some of the things that happened in the past in Bovespa that ended up creating a bad investment for venture capital and all that now would be much better covered. And I see this basically as an opportunity for unlisted private companies that are seeking to at least open part of their capital here in Brazil. There's this different scenario. Obviously, it depends on much more things, right? But I think it may be a good opportunity. Speaking from previous experiences working in unlisted companies, often we are asked if there's a chance to raise any capital for exploration, for example, in the Bovespa, and the way it is now, I think this chance may be materialized in the near future.
No, that's a very good point, and I think that brings us, and I think Richard was also talking about this a little. That of course, perhaps in the day-to-day activities of companies that are already listed in the TSX or the ASX and so forth, it won't change as much. But for Brazilian mining companies that are typically just operating locally, they will of course be required to adapt, and they would be in a better position to attract investments from abroad. And I think, what would you say about that, Richard? That you actually have the experience of for such a long time in Brazil, of seeing how these would really change the way the Brazilian companies would operate, and the ones that still do not have international investment. And then I think that, and perhaps what would you say in terms of the B3, as Fernando also raised? Do you think it's a real possibility that we could do this effort again and try to sit down with the B3, the Brazilian Stock Exchange, and push on the Brazilian central bank, the federal revenue, to have proper regulations that would encompass, for real and for once, I would say the exploration sector and the investments in the venture side in Brazil locally, and that companies will not depend on the TSX and others. What do you think?
I think it's a fantastic opportunity. Brazil has so much to offer. I'll speak selfishly about battery metals, right? I mean, Brazil today is basically the third most important battery metals country in the world, behind China and Australia. And I think when you look at the level of investment, I was kind of joking that Brazil's like the moon, but not really. I mean, it truly is one of the most underexplored countries anywhere in the world when it comes from mineral exploration standpoint. But at the same time, it's, Brazil's economy is basically larger than all the rest of Latin America combined. So when you look at the potential that's here, project finance, I think Marcos touched on this a little bit. Project financing in Brazil, it's hard. It's hard slogging. The debt covenants that are involved here, are what they are. When you look at the Bovespa, I mean, it's unbelievably dynamic exchange, but it's dominated by companies that are, 500 million to $1 billion reais and above. There's the Bovespa Mais, at least in name, but there really isn't liquidity in that sector of the market, which is a real shame. And I think if you looked at, say, the BNDES, the development bank, that could, it has development in the name, right? But it really doesn't develop. It goes out to companies that are cash flowing, have assets, et cetera. And they're happy to work as a commercial bank, maybe at a little bit lower financing, but there's not a lot of development in the development bank portion of it because they don't want to take any credit risk. So pre-operational companies really struggle to get over that hurdle. And on the flip side, the commercial banks, if you are in cash flow, if you have assets, if you have cash flow, if you have a list of clients, it's unbelievably fantastic, the debt covenants and the interest rates, et cetera, that you could get here. So if you could combine that with some of the credit funds that are out there, again, loads of high quality folks looking for investment opportunities. If you could combine kind of the private credit, the public, let's say commercial bank credit, development bank credit, together with an equity market that was dynamic and was willing to write checks for pre-operational companies, I mean, Brazil would explode. It would just go through the roof. And the Bovespa on its own is so dynamic and so liquid, and there's so much interest. I mean, I moved here in 2008, and I felt like a kid in a candy store because it was so dynamic and there was so much going on. And when you look at the stock market, I mean, it's kind of like the US was in my eyes, again, looking from the outside in. It was like the US in the 50s. It was so fantastic that there were opportunities everywhere. Folks were looking, just starting to understand what equities were, how it works, kind of how you invest, et cetera. And I still feel like in many ways, Brazil is maybe, 20 years behind in the equity markets compared to many of the other developed markets, be it London, be it Frankfurt, be it, US, et cetera. But what is here is so strong in terms of the foundation. And there's so much liquidity looking for opportunities. I just feel like the sky's the limit. I think it's the perfect time to kind of go back to that conversation, really try to build a framework around which markets could get comfortable with what we're saying here in terms of credibility and transparency as it relates to mining mineral resources companies. And the liquidity that's currently in Brazil is unbelievable. And if you just combine that with, a Bovespa Mais sort of mentality where you could invest in equity in pre-operational companies, I think it would just it would go through the roof. It would be fantastic. And I think it's going to happen. It's really just a question of when.
I love to hear these words, Richard. I think, and I have the same feeling. I'm optimistic, but the truth is that I think we are in a very good position. I think we have to take it. And so taking this link, I would say, Marcos, I know you've done a lot for this reporting system to be in place. You're someone that's really active in the industry in terms of like participating in debates with regulators, and you contribute a lot. But in your view, what do you think we can do? We're coming to the end of the webinar, so I think perhaps if we could think a little of what else can we do, right, in terms of pushing the regulations, if we should combine it with, as Richard was saying, with perhaps the B3, perhaps the federal revenue, perhaps the central bank, so forming this regulatory framework, a combined that would facilitate the investments and the understanding and trust, as we started the webinar on. What else you think we can do, and perhaps how we can continue to contribute to increase this understanding of our sector?
Well, Pedro, I would say we have one very important initiative in place. It's about a year since its inception, that it's the Invest Mine in Brazil. The idea is to deal with, financing mechanisms, opportunities, regulation, a project hub, ESG, mining sector. I think there's room for a lot more in terms of mine finance, and I agree with Richard. We have absolutely no ways of competing today with Canada, for example, for listing a company for $100,000, a bit more. You can do this there. We've spent 3 entities, ABPM, Agimba, and Brown. We've spent about ABPM, at the B3, the Bovespa. We spent about 1.5 years discussing this, and essentially, at the end of the day, conclusion was, well, we have good projects, but not formalized enough to try, the stocks exchange rate. And on the other hand, we have the stocks exchange liquid, but the bar was too high. I mean, as long as you have guarantees, collateral, fine, we can get you the finances. They have a 500 million equity, and then it was very hard to come, to put this together. I believe the Resolution 94 is one important step towards the place where we can work out we can resolve the issue with the financing, specifically those non-producing companies, players. I think the Brazil Invest Mine in Brazil, it's an initiative that deserves attention. It will, I'm sure it will bring results, but I think we cannot keep discussions going for 3, 4, 5 years on issues that's been discussed, I don't know, for the last 15 years. Shouldn't be this way. We know, the difficulties and obviously the logic on the public side is not exactly the logic on the private side. We have different speeds. We work at different speeds, okay, but there's good room for innovation on the finance space. We see, from whatever we can think about, including crowdfunding and other initiatives that I've read about. But essentially, I see that the BNDES has an important role on this, and I think it's the next big challenge. The environment in Brazil is changing little by little, but I think financing is the next big chart. Who knows whether we can replicate here the flow through shares we have in Canada, for example. And it wouldn't be that new here because we did have some specific rules on the annual income statement for the taxpayers back 30 years ago. So it shouldn't be that new, but we'll see. Time will tell, right?
Excellent, Marcos. I think let's do it. We got this development, and so it's an example that we can do it. So let's continue to push. So Fernando, any final words, final messages in terms of what you're seeing, what you want to see for the future of the sector?
Oh, listen, I think we this was a great step, and that's the key. We can't be developing things, reinventing the wheel. We have to talk to the world and connect, and this is exactly what we're doing now. So, and I would just like to echo the comments, and really getting the finance part is really tough. Here in Agua, we were lucky, but I see that we have a South Regional Development Bank that develops, in this case. Can't speak for BNDES, but it's tough. So as Marcos was saying, this is the next step. Moving on. Thank you for having me, Pedro.
Absolutely, Fernando. I should thank you all. And Richard, so we will finish with you and all of your optimistic side that I love so much, and please tell us what you're expecting for.
Oh, keep pushing, man. I think there's nothing but for all the horrible things that came out of the pandemic, for all the the horrible things that are going on in the world today, you look around and see all the positives that just as well have come out of it. If you look at how much countries, jurisdictions are looking at trying to diversify their supply chain. Brazil, man, it has so much to offer, particularly for North American markets, for European markets, for other markets where, from a logistical standpoint, there's significant advantages that could be taken care of, from working from here and exporting to wherever. I think when you look at the initiatives that are in place to just kind of make transparency, good governance, I think one thing, for example, that Marcos touched on that I think is another fantastic opportunity is ESG, right? 80% of energy in Brazil comes from hydropower. There's fantastic tax incentivized solar programs in place currently to actually go out and get supplemental energy. 10 years ago when I first moved here, you couldn't plug energy back into the grid. Now you can, and you can actually get paid for it. So I think there's so many positives that are happening here that I get excited just thinking about it and just talking about it. But I think as we kind of step through the next 5 to 10 years, if the funding piece of it could be kind of solved here in Brazil, and with Bovespa as dynamic as it is, the real, the investment here, if you want to play in Latin America, you typically want to play in Brazil. I mean, you're forced to play in Brazil. And so from my perspective, I just think there's a world of opportunities here. I think slowly these will turn into realities. And again, just like to thank you and Verano for the opportunity to speak. And I'm a 2 thumbs up guy, so I'm excited to see what comes of it. Excited to participate in initiatives and things like that, and just really appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys today.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Marcos. Thank you, Fernando. And thank you, especially for all of our attendees. We had people from all over the world, a great turnout. I'm really pleased that I think we achieved the purpose of the webinar, which was to spread the word, the good developments that we're having in Brazil. And let's see you in the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pedro.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good week.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye, Richard. Bye. Bye.